Welcome to the Get Real Podcast, your high-octane boost of full-on reality therapy for personal, business, and investing success with your host, Ron Phillips, because somebody's got to tell it like it is.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Get Real Podcast. Ron Phillips and Heather Marchant here.
Hello,
the
everyone.
lighter topic today.
Yes. Maybe that's why we chose it. Maybe we needed a lighter topic.
We needed a little bit of a break. Yeah. So, I mean, Heather, we've been talking about this in our Facebook group. And this is an unashamed plug for the Facebook group. If you haven't joined, you probably should. Great group.
Yeah. Reach out to us. We'll add you to the group. It's invest@rpcinvest.com and we'll connect you and add you in the group.
Yeah. So, Heather, tell everybody because this was your brainchild. Tell us what we were talking about on the Facebook group.
So one thing that I've been really focused on, well, not one, but it's actually quite complicated, is really how can I live the vision I have for my family today? Because it's really easy to create this ideal world of, if everything was great with my family, what would things look like? But to actually say, what can I do to do that now, to live that in the present is really, it can seem impossible. So to take a step back with my personal family is one thing that we envision for our family is a lot of camping, wilderness experiences, hiking, nature, all that stuff that my husband and I both really value and love. So 2 years ago, we bought an RV. We financed 75% of it or so. So we put down a good chunk of money, but we financed some of it and use our rental income to make that payment. And so it was something that we could bite off now, right? And take advantage of now. And this past summer, we planned a couple of trips. And honestly, it's really easy to tell yourself how you can't do it. Really easy. I could go on for a half hour as to all the reasons why this is difficult and won't really work. So it's really...
It would be a lot easier show for me if you did.
Yeah.
And I could just sit here and agree. I could nod the whole time.
So, but it's looking for how you can and having that mindset of, it may not look perfect. It may not be that I went on this trip to Colorado and was fully present the whole time with my family. Instead, I got stuff done that I needed to get done because I have goals and vision for what our client life looks like here at RP Capital. And I love what I do. So I didn't want to back off of RP Capital because I love it. And then blending that with family time and having internet and Wi-Fi access, cell signal and Wi-Fi access, like making sure that I could do that part and then still live this part of the vision with my family. So sometimes it was messy and sometimes I was super stressed out because I needed cell service and was driving around trying to find it. So it's not to say that it's perfect, but I use all of that as an illustration to say, how can you live your vision and bite off what you can in real life now instead of waiting for 20 years to make that happen?
Yeah. And, before we talk a little bit more about that, let's talk about something that I think is really important for everybody. But man, business owners, entrepreneurs get lost in this so easily. And I think even if you don't, you're going to see that this happens in your life as well. In a book by Dan Sullivan called The Gap and the Gain, he describes why people are so miserable. And it makes so much sense if you actually think about it. And let's put it in terms of social media, because everybody now is on social media. I guess the smart people maybe aren't, but everybody's on social media. And what happens is especially our kids, we all have this ideal that Heather was talking about in all the aspects of our lives. We have this ideal, right? And we all tell ourselves that if we could just get to this ideal, we would be happy. It can be as simple as, man, if I could just live in this area, then I'd be happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the problem is that the ideal is always, because it's perfect, it's always out of reach. And our achievements in reaching whatever our ideal is, if we measure or we visualize how far we are away from our ideal, no matter what we've achieved, there's always a gap.
Yeah.
Always. And I've talked about this before on the show, where if you do these if-then statements, the cheese just gets moved. You never, ever hit the ideal. It never happens, because by definition, you can't. Right?
Yeah.
So
that's so applicable to like fitness and stuff too.
Yes, you can't. There's no perfect body, folks.
No,
it just doesn't exist. There isn't one. And so if you are on, Instagram and you're comparing yourself, which is what our kids do, by the way, and all of us as well. But I mean, our kids are caught up in this because they've been raised in this new world that is completely fake.
Mm-hmm.
And if you measure yourself based on where you are and the ideal, if that's the place you live, that's called what Dan Sullivan calls the gap. You're going to always be miserable because you can't reach the ideal. No one can.
Yeah.
And that's what happens when we compare ourselves to other people too, is that you're comparing their highlight reel to reality, and you're comparing yourself against their highlight reel. And that's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's what you measure, that's the gap. And then what he says is, you could live in the place where you're measuring the gain, right? Because you're always gaining on the ideal, but we got to celebrate what we achieve. And if we celebrate what we achieve on the way to the ideal, doesn't matter if the ideal keeps moving away, we're still winning.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're measuring in the gain, we're measuring the gains that we've made. And that makes you happy.
Yes.
And fulfilled.
Yes. On this last trip we took in Colorado, it was 3 weeks. And I told myself that I was present. Number one, like I came on this trip so that I did a lot of this, but I would flip flop back and forth, if I'm being honest with myself, right? Between living in the gap and living in the gain, and saying, oh man, I didn't do this hike with my kids today. My husband took them and I missed out, and they saw a moose. And I was like, come on, like I missed out, and living in the gap versus I would get out with them every day. I would do something with my family every day. And I would usually just time block my day a little bit. And then I would sometimes flip into, oh man, I'm doing this. Like I am blending both worlds that I live in, that I love both. So living in the gap was definitely depressing.
Yes.
Like,
yes, it very much is. And you know what? The unfortunate thing, Heather, is that the majority of the population lives there all the time.
Yeah.
People call, I talk to people on the phone and everybody says, how are you? And I always say something like fantastic or something. I'm generally, I genuinely feel that way most of the time. And it is because, I just recently read this book, so this is kind of a new concept, but it's not really a new concept. We've been talking on the show. We had Shaun McCloskey on. We've talked about vision. We've talked about living vision, and we've talked about living pieces of your vision now rather than waiting, and getting rid of the if-then statements. But I love how Dan Sullivan puts this. This gap and gain concept is so easy to understand. It just depends on which side you're measuring you and your achievements. And whether it's by accident or not, I've lived in the gain for the majority of my life. And because of that, I just tend to be happier. Now, I've been telling people, probably wrongly, that happiness is just a choice. And while that's true, that's a very simplistic thing to say. The choice really is in how you measure things. And when I would say, look, it's just a choice. You choose to be miserable or you can choose to be happy. Well, that's true. But the how to, I think Dan nails here.
Yeah. I love this quote. It says, most people, especially highly ambitious people, are unhappy because of how they measure their progress, because they have that ideal, right? So it is, man, that's so relatable for me, because I probably tend to live in the gap more if I'm being, like, I guess, vulnerable. And
Well,
I have to mentally shift into the gain
and
a lot.
everybody lives in the gap.
Yeah.
Every single day, you will find yourself living in the gap and the gain. And if we're all being honest, we all go into the gap at some point. Sometimes we do it with other people. Like we'll judge them on the gap instead of the gain. And we do it all the time. We make judgments about people based on the gap instead of the gain, which isn't fair to them. I would say, I was just getting ready to say we wouldn't do that to ourselves. Actually, we do that to ourselves. But it's, once you realize the two differences, then, like you were saying, when you were on your trip, it's easier to live in the gain than it is to live in the gap. It's so much more fun.
Yeah, it's
It's
true.
so much more positive. And I find I get much more done. I attract more opportunity. Opportunity likes people who live in the gain. It doesn't like people who live in the gap. The people who live in the gap are negative people. They're constantly frustrated, and they, whether or not they're achieving really, really well, they're disappointed all the time.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it's a lot of the mental health stuff that, gives my husband a demand for his expertise.
Oh, crap. We shouldn't be teaching this, that we're in a lower demand for your husband's. Doug, we're sorry.
But it's the people that surprise you, right? That end up suicidal, and they're super good, happy looking people that have a lot going on for them. And then you find out they're suicidal. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
High achievers. But they just, in their own life, they've never looked at themselves that way. And you know what? This is so prevalent in it, probably a lot of things, but I live in the business world. So I hang around with a whole bunch of business owners. And at the masterminds I go to and stuff, this happens so much, man. People will talk about this amazing thing they did, and they're like, yeah, well, I got all this other stuff I got to do. So let's, I'm like, whoa, wait a second. You just glazed over this massive thing that you did like it was nothing.
Yeah.
When you just like ate the elephant. The elephant is gone, bones and all. And you're just glazing over it because you see another elephant down the road you got to eat. Let's just stop for a second and pat yourself on the back. Let's celebrate this massive achievement that you made. And they were living in the gap, and we try to move them into the gain, because if you don't, literally you're miserable all the time. And one day you wake up and go, what in the heck am I doing all of this for? This is ridiculous. I'm just miserable. But even if you stop doing what makes you miserable, you're still going to be miserable if you can't figure out how to live in the gain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another way to say this vision thing that we're talking about is, how can I live more of my ideal now and recognize it?
Mm-hmm.
It's so, and then that's so important, right?
And it doesn't have to be big and bold, right? Like it doesn't have to be a big 3-week trip like I took with my family, and it's going to look different for everybody. And we put this out into our Facebook group and said, what did you do? Right. And it's one thing I noticed is that people put the limitations on, like, well, this is why I didn't do this, or, you know what I mean? Like, these are the reasons why it's difficult for us to live in our vision. Right. So I noticed that trend, but for the most part, it was, man, I got one client emailed me their family vision, and I was super, what's the right word? Touched, I guess. Like, I emailed him back and was like, I may have had some tears in my eyes reading what your vision is like for your family. I was really, it felt like I was taking something really personal from him, and that he shared it with me. I was super honored. But getting clarity on your vision were some of the comments. Being in the outdoors, spending time motorcycling, So it doesn't have to be something like a big monumental thing. One person said that they had always been dreaming of going back to Glacier National Park since 5th grade and went with her husband this summer. And then one client retired, which was super awesome, and taking some trips and just being present more with her family. I love just the focus too, Ron, that you mentioned on celebrating the victories, right? That if you do something because you focused on the gain or the vision and you do something different because of it, celebrating that instead of having it be, well, I didn't do it big enough, that it was enough because it was it's something different that you improved. This quote too, sorry, all from the book, it says, when we measure ourselves against our previous selves, we're in the gain. So,
yep. That's the achievement, right? That's the achievement. Because I tell people all the time, like I am 100% bought into the fact that you have to set massive, huge ideals or goals, right? In every ounce of your being. So, personal, family, financial, fitness, like all of these areas, spiritual, all of them, huge, massive, gigantic goals. And I set these huge goals and I aim to hit them, but I don't hit all of them. And if I measured the gap on all of them, I would be a 100% failure because I set such massive goals. And then I hear people and they're like, man, I would never set a goal like that, because if I set a goal like that and I failed, I'd just be a failure. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a second. I've never been able to articulate, until I read this book, never been able to articulate why a person would be so miserable if they didn't reach their goal. And it's because, or why they wouldn't set a goal that was too high, because they feel like they would be miserable. And the reason is because they're living in the gap and not the gain. I set these massive goals and, and sometimes I hit them. Sometimes I don't hit them. But if I don't, and I measure the gain, holy crap.
Yeah.
I made so much progress. And I think that's why, and I think I just realized it over the last several weeks, why I feel so happy all the time. It's because I'm measuring my gains, and I didn't even realize the difference really. And it's such a simple shift. This is so simple to implement in every part of your life. So, part of my vision is my relationship with my wife. Something super simple to do, which is actually in my vision, is what can I do today to make Bobby Joe happy? Now that seems super simple. It is super simple, but that one super simple thing makes me focus on her, and it makes me less selfish for just a little bit. And then when I do whatever it is and she's happy, I get to feel great because I've achieved something. Now, is that my ideal? No, that's a silly little thing. The ideal is the perfect marriage, the perfect relationship, which no one has. Okay. Nobody has that. But if I focus on the gap, I'm literally just focusing on being miserable about my relationship. What possible good could come from that?
Yeah. Man.
And like as I say that, as I spit that out of my mouth, Heather, I'm thinking to myself, man, how many marriages or partnerships or anything just blows up because the two people are just simply living in the gap and haven't measured the gain.
Yeah, that's true.
What a simple concept.
And that you're unhappy. And then you can blame that on lots of different things and assume the unhappiness has to do with, your partner or whatever, that it's not really.
Of course it is, because it's you're measuring them in the gap too, right?
Yes.
And then think about the other book that we strongly recommend on this program, The Compound Effect. Think of the compounded effect of measuring consistently in the gap your entire life and measuring other people in the gap instead of the gain. And we're all guilty of this, all of us. Yeah. Anyway, and this is something, Heather, this is something so simple that people, everybody listening to this week, you can go, this week I choose to live in the gain. And this week I choose to live in the gain in this part of my vision. Maybe I'm not going to hit my ideal, but listen, I'm going to live this piece of my vision better. And because I live it better, I've achieved something. And because I've achieved something and I measure that, I'm living in the gain, and I can feel really, really good about that.
Yeah. And if you slip up on it and you find yourself in the gap, it's literally just a switch in the way that you're thinking. You just
flip it.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Yeah.
What is a gain in this experience? And I'll give you a good one, because I've talked very openly about my partnership dissolution many years ago. And I could have lived in the gap on that. And I did a lot live in the gap there, but I also lived in the gain. And today I pretty much 100% live in the gain. That was one of the worst experiences of my life. And yet it was the best thing that ever happened to me financially. The best thing that ever happened to me at the time, the worst thing that ever happened to me financially. But for whatever reason, they don't know what that is. A lot of support, a lot of help from a lot of people. I was able to live in the gain and came out of that thing stronger. It doesn't have to be huge like that, though. It can be anything. Just choose to live in the gain rather than the gap. And when you do that with your vision, if you've got one, you're going to find that you are able to live your vision now. Pieces of your vision you're going to have massive, small, incremental, but massive over time gains in living your vision. And that's really the question that we were asking in our Facebook group, and that Heather, really got to showcase for everybody. And so this week, I just encourage you. I know, Heather, we talk about this all the time. I encourage everybody listening to this. The thing that you should get out there and make happen this week is this, about as much in your life as you possibly can, including, and probably most importantly, the other people in your life that you're judging and that we have a tendency to judge based on the gap. Start judging them based on the gain and see what happens. Watch what happens this week. And if you had a great experience, we'd love for you to just comment, on this particular show. Just get in there and comment and say, man, I lived in the gain this week, and this is what happened to my life. I promise, if you do this, life will get better. It's impossible for it to not get better.
So true. I mean, you could look at this as just thinking positively, but it just is so much more than that. Measuring. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
All right. So that's it. That's the how to live your vision and be happy most of the time. That's the how to. It's right there. It's not any more complicated than that. So this week, Heather and I encourage you to get out there and make that happen.
This has been the Get Real Podcast. To subscribe and for more information, including a list of all episodes, go to getrealestatesuccess.com.